Hello, trip sitters, and welcome back to the Trip Sitting Podcast. This episode, I am extremely excited to bring you guys Emma Beckerle, who is an incredible human being, an incredible woman who has a vast amount of knowledge in both the cannabis and the psychedelic space. She's done a lot of fundraising, specifically in the cannabis space. That was really where she got started, and has since actually launched her own consulting business. And now she helps entrepreneurs in both spaces get their ventures off of the ground. And she's just doing some absolutely amazing work. And I know I said this before, but the amount of knowledge that she has is absolutely incredible. And we really just dive right into some of the great things that are happening within both the cannabis and the psychedelic space. We talk about the similarities, we talk about a lot of the differences, and really how we can move as a society to incorporate both of these incredible medicines into our everyday lives. So thank you all for joining in, and I hope that you really, really enjoy this episode. And then also really quick before we start, if you wouldn't mind following the podcast and then also giving it a rating on whichever platform that you're listening to this on, and then also consider sharing it with a friend as well so I get in front of more viewers. Thank you again for tuning in, and here is Emma.
I'm an introvert, so all of this like socializing over the last week, I'm just like highly stimulated. So that was beautiful.
Yeah. Is all the socializing, I guess, like the craziness in New York, just still like the remnants from 420 last week?
There's so many conferences. So like this week there was Trailblazers, which is a psychedelics and cannabis conference, and then there was MJ Unpacked. So it was literally Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday through Friday. Today I didn't go to the conference, but every single night it's been events after, and it's just so. And like my world is a lot of that is the networking side of things, and I love it. But it's just It's been a while since I've had a week where I'm out until like 2 a.m. every single night at these after parties. And I am not built for that anymore.
Man,
not.
even me, like I can't do that shit anymore. Like I had a weekend like 2 weekends ago where like Thursday, Friday, Saturday or something. Like I went out 3 nights in a row. I didn't even stay out that late. Like I was literally home by like 12 or 1 most of the nights, just like sleeping. But like on Sunday, I woke up and I'm like, oh my God, I can't fucking do this anymore. Like, this is crazy. I'm 26.
It's unbelievable. And like, I love being around other humans, and I like love the energy, and I like when I'm in those spaces, I'm like into it. But then when I get back into my own space, I'm like, whoa, okay, I feel like I need 48 hours of like no human contact. That's what I think.
No, I need to hibernate alone in my room. I literally like this week, I've been feeling sick for like the last month now. And it's just like, it gets kind of better, but not fully better. And then and I get sick again, and then it gets kind of better, but not fully better. And then I get sick again. So like, I finally this week was like, this is clearly an issue. So I went to the doctor, which I hate doing, but I did it anyways. But like then later that day, I was like, okay, like I'm actually sick. I don't think I ever accepted the fact that I was like feeling sick. And so, yeah. And then I went home, and then I took half an edible, and I just sat on my couch, and I'm like, I'm going to do fucking nothing. Like I'm going to give myself permission to do fucking nothing. Exactly. And then I woke up the next day, and that was the first time that like I actually genuinely felt better. Was just allowing myself to fucking do nothing.
You just needed to stop, like just do less and just chill. And it's so hard. It really, and I struggle with it myself. And when you're working for yourself and hustling out there, like you could work all the time and still not be working enough. And what I've realized is that the energy management is actually like one of the most critical things I need to be focusing on now that I'm running my own business. And that time to yourself is like everything. I think of it as like the Mario Kart, like those boosters. Like that's just it's the only way to keep maintaining velocity. And so I've gotten better at it, but there's this guilt still that is ingrained in us because we're like this hyper productive society. So you still feel like you're doing something wrong almost, even though it's exactly what you need and will make you better and probably more effective.
Yeah, I still feel that too, but I could not imagine what that feels like living in New York. and doing that, because like that city net just never fucking stops. Like part of the big reason why I moved from Chicago to Denver was because like I'm like I need to slow the fuck down. Like this isn't sustainable. Like there's so much
Yeah,
external pressure to be doing shit all the time too, because everyone around you is doing that.
it's that's a great point, and it keeps coming up, and I am doubling down on New York, but it's something that I've realized where I'm a nature person, and so somehow I've surrounded myself in this like concrete view. Um, but like I also love the energy. It's this weird thing though. So I need to really intentionally get out of the city and find balance, because if I don't, you definitely go crazy. And like New York, you're right. The thing that's great and tough about New York, if you're kind of in the introvert space that I am, the fake introvert, because I'm like out there, everyone thinks I'm super social, but I'm actually like,
Do you think you're an introverted extrovert or an extroverted introvert?
ooh, what's the distinction between those two? Like, how
I
would you?
guess whatever the second one is. So like if you're an extroverted introvert, which is what I think that's what I am, is like actually at heart I'm an introvert, but like I still thrive in like extroverted environments. But
That's
like
it. That's
my
it.
alone time is what's actually gonna like help me stay sane and like keep my peace.
That is me to a T. And like if you see me, because I'm a salesperson, right? Like
Mhm.
I've been in sales, like making deals, working with, and so it's all about relationships, and I love it. I almost get high off of the energy of other people. I think I kind of do, and it so, but it's adrenaline more than it's filling my tank, if you will. And I've
Yeah.
that was a distinction that I discovered really during the pandemic, where I had been going for my entire career, my whole life, really, being in New York, being from New York. And then when there was stillness, I thought I would go crazy. I thought, oh no, where am I going to get my energy filled from? And then I realized, wait a minute, I'm thriving. Wait a minute. Actually, my brain's working better. Wait a minute, I have space to actually like pull thoughts together and not just react to everything that's around me. And started to really unpack that, and I realized like since the pandemic I have been like acutely aware of ensuring that I have not equal amount of alone time, because that's not possible at all, but at least like a solid 10 hours a week spread out where I can write and meditate, like, and I need that from a sanity standpoint.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, fucking we all do. And we all just like don't give ourselves the time. But like, I mean, I like what you said, which is about like intention, being
Yes,
very intentional about where you put your time and where you put your energy, because like that's what's going to make or break it, especially when you work for yourself. And
completely.
so diving into that, I know you work very, very largely in both the cannabis and the psychedelic industries. So I want to ask you, I guess, what are some of the biggest similarities? And then I guess, what are some of the biggest differences between the industries? And I want to preface that by saying, as somebody who really only operates in the psychedelics industry, and really that's what I follow, like you hear people talking about the parallels between them all the time, but I think that's just because they're both drugs and they were both Schedule One drugs. I think the industries are probably largely different, if I had to guess.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And so I've been in the cannabis space professionally for the last 5 years. I entered the space in 2018, and
Now,
I'm still
non-professionally, how long have you been in the cannabis space?
non-professionally. I started my first time starting smoking weed was at 13.
Okay.
So,
Okay, there we go.
so I've been a fan of the plant for my whole life.
Okay.
But I will say that like with cannabis, my relationship, because you hear people talk about their relationship with the plant, cannabis was just weed, and it was just another drug, because when I was younger I just was trying to get like fucked up. Like it was about getting as high as possible, right? I didn't have a great relationship with substances or myself for a good portion of my life. But in my late 20s, actually, I came to cannabis as a tool for managing sleep, actually. So I had a very intense job, and so cannabis was something that I turned to. I was clean, actually, off all drugs at that time, and was seeking medicinal support for my anxiety and for sleep health. Cannabis was fantastic. And that experience started to sort of switch my entire viewpoint on plant medicine and what we've been told being bullshit and the dare propaganda and right. And so that started this cycle. I've always been a questioner, but that was when I started to really go deep in researching the spaces. That I really came to cannabis as a full relationship, like in my late 20s, probably 25,
Gotcha.
26, maybe mid 20s. And then since then, it's been an ongoing, like for the last decade, I have been like had the relationship with the plant. That's been sort of my main medicine as it relates to managing ADHD and anxiety and some of those things. But
Mhm.
to go back to your question, so cannabis 5 years, and then psychedelics. I've really been working in the space, and working is sort of a not exactly the right term, I would say, because it's not really an industry, in my opinion. It's a movement. And working means a lot of things, and there's a lot of nonprofits and a lot of cool projects, but there's not a lot of money in the space. And that sort of will go to the answer that I'll provide in terms of the differences. Well, the similarities are actually smaller, in my opinion. So I can sort of start there. Is that, well, I think actually let's start with so the similarities is that you're dealing with Schedule One substances. So cannabis, which is still, it's shocking to consider.
Fucking insane that that's
Like,
still a fucking
it's like
Schedule
when
One
I say it out
substance.
loud, I'm like, I can't. It's so
It's
offensive. So offensive. But cannabis is a Schedule One substance as well, and psychedelics is also a large umbrella. And psychedelics, they're not all made the same; they're all very different. So psychedelics, in of itself, is sort of a general sort of term for a bunch of different compounds, and whether like synthetic medicines as well as plant medicine. So it's also its own big umbrella. But the similarities at the top level is that cannabis and MDMA and psilocybin and LSD and among others are on the Schedule One list, and that basically means that the they basically identified these substances as having no medicinal benefit and high potential for harm. And if you look at the Schedule One list versus the Schedule Two, Schedule Three, Schedule Four, it is astonishing to see how they're classifying these various substances, because you look at things like opiates, which we know have caused an unbelievable amount of harm and death in this country that we are still deeply, deeply struggling with. And those are not Schedule One, and we know how highly addictive they are. Xanax, benzos, those as well, not Schedule One. There are medicinal benefits. We have enough proof now, in my opinion, that psilocybin, cannabis, there are medicinal healing benefits. We actually, like Marinol, for example, like we've got Epidiolex, like we actually have medicines out there using the plant cannabis, and it's still not deemed beyond Schedule One. So that would
during this conversation, I also just love to point out the fact too that people don't think of alcohol as a drug, but alcohol is nowhere on that list, and that's probably one of the most destructive ones in our entire society. I
I
like alcohol as much as the next guy, but it's a drug. Sorry, guys.
Oh my gosh, no, and I'm so glad you brought that up, right? So I'm so glad you brought that up, because when we think, and the reason why we came to these spaces is because as I've gone through, I've had a deep, deep background with addiction, with legal substances, alcohol being my first love, my first toxic love. And that evolved into addiction to painkillers as well as benzos, specifically Xanax. And so the funny thing, ironic thing, maybe not funny, but is that the biggest issues that I've had with substances has been via the legal route. Like, I mean, I was underage when I started drinking alcohol, so I was still breaking the law, but I was getting it from my parents' liquor cabinet. They bought it legally, or I was actually buying it from liquor stores that didn't care about selling it to underage kids. So alcohol is incredibly destructive. And I'm not somebody that said, I am agnostic when it comes to drugs, right? Where it's like, I don't blame the drug. I blame I blame how we interact with it. And I think it's up to each individual
Our
to
relationship with it, as we were kind of talking
exactly,
about earlier.
exactly. Like, so for me personally, alcohol it assassinates my life. Like, I take a sip and it's over. But that's not true for everybody. And having a few glasses of wine there's nothing better but you have to sort of like evaluate what works well for you. And my whole thing with this entire movement, both in cannabis and psychedelics, is about adding tools to the toolkit and providing broader access, right? So decriminalization is really my major focus. And then obviously figuring out how we build an infrastructure that is sensible so that we provide access. It's not prohibitively expensive. And that's really at the core of everything for me, is that I know that I've had personal issues with legal substances that are not Schedule 1, and these Schedule 1 substances that supposedly have no benefits have genuinely, and this is not hyperbole, they've saved my life. I do not think I would still be on this planet if it were not for the healing powers of psilocybin and the experiences that I've had with it. And cannabis was a pathway out of drug addiction in its own right, right? And so that, to me, that my personal journey and experience with these substances, it almost felt like an obligation. Like it doesn't feel like I have a choice but to push as hard as I possibly can to fight for like legislation and fight for education and fight for these things to become more accessible, because I do feel like I'm almost on borrowed time, right? And it's because of these things that I'm still here. And because of that, that's why I'm in these spaces. So that's that to me. So Schedule 1, that is the main tie between these two spaces, right? And so with Schedule 1 comes some downstream sort of complications, if you will, that are there are considered across both spaces. And that's like lack of access to traditional financing, right? Because if you're Schedule 1, it's federally illegal. So there's less financing available, less business loans. There's 280E, which is a tax thing that if you've got an actual business that's touching a Schedule 1 substance, you can't file business write-offs and do any tax write-ups for your business. So there's a lot of things that complicate your business if you're operating in a space that is dealing directly with a Schedule 1 substance. And so those complications, those are similar. However, that's, to me, kind of where it ends. So like there are, and I would say the history, the way in which the war on drugs, right? Like it's not a war on drugs, it's a war on people. And the reality is that
it's a war on our minds.
It's a war on minds. And if you look at the drugs that are on the Schedule 1 list, you can point directly to racial issues as to why. Or, for example, like the LSD movement, right? That got put on there because you're dealing with it was during Vietnam, right? You're dealing with the hippies, and we have a free speech, we can say what we want in this country. But if you take the drugs from the people that are saying what you don't want, and you say, you know what, we're not policing your speech, but these drugs that you're using, these are illegal now, and we're going to throw you in prison. All of a sudden, that's the loophole around the free speech issue, right? And so you're seeing that, then you're seeing the racial side of things with cannabis. That is a purely racial problem, and why it was actually illegalized, really. And so the Black and brown communities have been completely annihilated because of the policing around cannabis, which is unbelievably offensive. There's still people incarcerated for nonviolent drug offenses in cannabis. So when you talk about like the social justice and ensuring that as we're building these communities and these movements, that we're considering the harm that has been done, that's another parallel, right? Because there's heaviness to these drug laws, and there's so much damage that has been done to communities because of the way that these drug laws have been policed. And so those are where these industries and movements intersect and overlap and have similarities. The regulations and how things are rolling out state by state. You see Oregon now has psilocybin legal. You've got Colorado where it's legal. New Jersey may be the next to fall, right? So the reality is that the way that it's rolling out with psilocybin specifically, you're seeing that state by state kind of approach. I don't think that's going to be the case probably for the broader sort of rollout of psychedelics. I'm hoping that they will be sort of descheduling and we won't have to do this sort of Frankenstein state by state thing that we're doing with cannabis. But then the differences are like beyond. They're totally different things, because if you look at the cannabis industry, what it is we have medical dispensaries. It started in a caregiver sort of medical model where you had to get out in California, and you had to get some sort of
I didn't even know that, like, about California, that, like, so I mean, I was born in 1997. In 1997 is when cannabis became medically legal in the state of California. I
yeah.
had no idea that it was medically legal, like literally until it became recreationally legal. That's when I found out that it had already been medically legal.
Yeah, okay, that's so interesting. What an interesting perspective. So when it flipped over to adult use, that's when you were like, "Oh, wait, it was around, but I
Yeah.
didn't." Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. I mean, I just came from a place where, like, both of my parents were so like, if you do drugs, like, I'm gonna fucking shove it down your throat. Like, I was just so scared off from it that I was like, I didn't even look at it. I'm like, hey, these are terrible things. I'm not even gonna pay any
Yeah.
attention.
Did you have, so 1997, so I am 10 years older than you. So did you go through the DARE program?
Ours wasn't called Dare, it was called Star, which is some other
Oh, they
ridiculous
rebranded
acronym.
it. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, they just rebranded, but it was so useless. It, and like, it taught me, it like taught me weird ways to get high that I never would have thought of normally, to like watch out for these things that are happening, and never once did any of those things happen.
Yeah. This doesn't match up. Well, it's so funny. So I was a DARE kid, right? And
Uh-huh.
I found a friend of mine, because I'm still friends with a lot of like my old school homies from when we grew up, mostly because we're all trauma bonded.
Yeah. That's how it works.
We all went to Catholic school, went through DARE, and we're all just like, why are we all so screwed up? It's like, well, there's a common denominator. It's
Hmm.
where we grew up. And so one of them, a good friend, and they're all, it's actually, two of them are active military army. So another reason why I'm in these spaces is because I'm like, I have a deep, deep tie to the military and PTSD. But one of them found our DARE graduation footage, and you actually, I think I was in second grade or third grade, I can't even remember, but you actually see me walking out with my little like thing, and it's just so ironic that I am in these spaces like completely trying
Hmm.
to bust it up. But to your point, DARE was so ineffective. It was like, honestly, one, I think the videos they showed us were on, like, this is dating me, but they used to bring these like old TVs.
Oh, no, we had those.
Okay. Oh, so you didn't have like a great funded school then.
I will. I mean, I guess, like, ironically, like, we did, but we very much still had those. Like, that was the part that they kept. That they're like, we're gonna fucking keep these. Like, we got like the smart Elmos and shit. But if we wanted to watch TV, we're still gonna bring in the 300-pound TV on a cart.
Oh my gosh. But you know what? There's something wonderful about that though. I kind of
Oh,
love.
it's so pure.
It is so pure. And you know what's so funny is that I don't know. So like this just, I haven't thought about this in a while, but I haven't thought about these TVs in a while actually. So now this is like bringing up old memories. But the days when you would walk into the classroom and the TV was already set up, you're like,
Man.
yes, hell yes, we're watching a movie. Like,
Yeah, like in science class, I'm watching fucking Bill Nye today. Like, I ain't doing shit.
I watched Bill Nye in science class too. I'm like, I could be a science teacher. This is easy.
Hmm.
That's so funny. But so DARE for me, I have been obsessed with drugs since I was a kid, and honestly, it started with DARE. There's addiction in my family, so I think I've always been very tuned into dependency, and so that has always been some. But like without the language, as a kid, you don't really know but you are picking up on dependency, and you're sort of understanding some level of it. Then DARE comes along, and to your point, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of other ways of going. There's like this, not just alcohol, like there are so many other cool things. So my reaction was, because they had these like the peer pressure videos, right?
Hmm.
Where it's like you got like the cool kids that are pressuring you to smoke a
Just say
cigarette.
no.
Just say no, and it's like they're pressuring you to smoke a cigarette, and then you have a cigarette, and then it makes you a crackhead within a week.
Yeah,
Um,
and now you're shooting up under a bridge. I don't know how that happened, but
it's
the natural progression of things.
incredibly quickly. But at the time though, I always judged the person being peer pressured. I was like that. I don't know. I had a very wrong reaction to it, where I'm like, I kind of want to hang out with those guys that are like
Yeah.
flinging the drug. I was a degenerate, so I was like, they seem more fun. And but I also have, I'm a contrarian, so anything the adults would say, I always was like, I don't believe you. Like I don't believe you. And so it was so weird. I would go to the library because that's what we would do. There was a library, like, and that's what I rented videos from the library too. And I would buy books on individual drugs. And so one of the first books I read was called Cocaine. And I think this was in like seventh or eighth grade. So when I was actually like starting to develop some consciousness and
Yeah.
like individual thinking. And so I became obsessed. And so I went deep on just like the mechanism of action of cocaine and methamphetamine and heroin. And so I just started, that's really, when I look back on it, Dare piqued an interest about exiting standard state consciousness. And so that really was what it was. And even as a child, and as a kid, I think I was always very interested in different states of consciousness. I'm very internal. I think deeply. And so, dreaming, I was always obsessed with that. But I also used to do these things with breath, and I didn't have the language at the time, but I would like hold my breath or do like intense breathing to like get myself into different states of consciousness. And like now I'm like, oh, that's like kind of like low-key holotropic breath work that I was doing.
It's so funny making those connections. Like once you get older, you're I've been doing this shit like forever.
Yeah. And like, and so, and I think it was like, I probably read some stupid article in like 17 or like some stupid magazine, because that's what was around back then. We didn't have social media. And so, but that's really what like got me into all of the drug stuff. But just from a fascination standpoint. And it really was because, like I said, addiction in my family, I was very interested in what was happening in the brain. At the time, I couldn't really place it. But now that I'm older and I look back, I'm like, oh, this was it was the interest spark here, and then it just continued on, and it manifested in like just like insane partying and like doing drugs for a
Hmm.
series of years. Then I got clean, and then I found drugs that were and molecules and medicines that actually like were more suitable for being a productive human being in the world.
Yeah.
But what I will say, going back to the original question about the differences, is that so cannabis is the way that the industry has rolled out is that you've got this, like we were saying, it started with medical. There's 22 states where adult use is legal right now. So we've got dispensaries in 22 states, which is phenomenal. And then there's states that have the medical dispensaries as well and only have a medical program, which means that you need to get a referral from a doctor or a nurse to get a med card, and you need to have a med card to be able to purchase cannabis legally in that state. So cannabis usually rolls out where it's medical first, then it comes, and then it flips over to adult use. And the way that model is set up is that it's a dispensary model. So you have licensing across the entire supply chain, manufacturers, extractors, cultivators that are growing the cannabis. And then you've got distributors in some states that are actually like transporting it. Every single part of the supply chain that touches the plant must hold a license. And that license is issued by the state. Every single state has very different licensing structures. There's similarities, but some are limited license states, which means there's a cap, and there's only
Hmm.
like a portion of licenses that are like given out. Then you have states like Oklahoma where it's totally unlimited, and you can
It's like a
grab
fucking free for all.
total free for all. And I forget what the actual total, like the number is, but it's like a couple $1,000s or a few $1,000s to actually get a retail license in Oklahoma. So then barriers to entry also are very different in different states.
I'm
Um,
I'm I'm really curious just kind of about that point and to touch on something we were talking about earlier as far
yeah.
as like, a lot of the war on drugs is for over policing black and brown communities. Have you seen any states that have just actually done like a very good job of making sure that they are giving the licenses to these underserved communities, or for the most part, are they all just kind of dropping the ball?
Well, okay, I'm really glad that you asked this question because there are states that have tried, right? And I think there's states that like I think Massachusetts has done an okay job actually in terms of prioritizing licenses for social equity applicants. That's essentially what they say. And so there's different programs, right? So um, when a cannabis like when the regs really roll out for cannabis, the taxes are one part of it, right? So like, and I actually think that like like where you're distributing the taxes is really that you're gaining from the sales of cannabis in state. I think that's really where you can make the most impact. So you've got states that have commitments in a portion of the taxes are going to developing facilities for addiction care or education or various things in communities that have been affected by the war on drugs. So that every state has some level of like commitment within the taxes that are being collected in that capacity, right? So there's that. Then you've got the approach where you're prioritizing social equity and social like justice impact communities for licensing. And so that other states have tried to do that. Illinois was doing that and is doing that. Massachusetts is doing that. New Jersey has social. They all have their like some sort of social equity program where we're prioritizing these licensees. But the challenge is that licenses are not a golden ticket. Like getting like this is the thing, and this is where and New York is a really really good live example where the licensing structure in New York, and this is it's very unique. New York is the most unique in terms of how it's rolling out, and it's the most strict in terms of how limited the profile of licensees are in terms of who they're giving the licenses to. And so I'll give you this example. So in New York, when it was legalized for adult use, what then happens? First, you get legalized, right? So, like, cool, now it's legal. Cannabis has been legal for adult use in New York for a while now. Now, that doesn't mean you can buy cannabis legally, right? So, because what happens after it's legalized for adult use is that you need to figure out a licensing structure, and then you need to figure out how you're going to distribute those licenses. And then once you have a license, there's also a build out process to actually like create a storefront or a cultivation or a manufacturing facility. So it's a long process. Just legalization just means like, okay, great, you can smoke weed now. Depending on the different regs, maybe you can do it
like we
outside
still
now.
got to figure out how exactly this is going to work within our society.
Exactly. Now that is a parallel between psychedelics and cannabis, which is that once we get it descheduled, MDMA will likely be the first psychedelic that is approved by the FDA. That does not mean that all of a sudden MDMA is going to be widely available. We still need to figure out what that structure is going to be and how we actually incorporate it into the society, into our society. How do we work with insurance companies? How do we work with how do we actually make this a profitable, viable business for the people that are doing the work? How do you make it accessible for patients? So the complexity, the massive pile of things that you need to figure out are so vast in both spaces. So look, that's another parallel between cannabis and psychedelics, which is that like we are not even at base camp yet. Like so getting us to
well, what is interesting, I will say, about psychedelics, and I don't know if you are kind of following this and paying attention, but obviously ketamine clinics have now been around for quite a couple of years. So like that's kind of this weird loophole where like also ketamine is kind of a psychedelic, but also kind of not really a psychedelic at the same time. But recently we've seen all these ketamine clinics that were supposedly the best in the business fucking going under because they're not actually making money.
You got it. You nailed it completely. Yes. And so ketamine's interesting because like it's an anesthetic, but it does like at certain doses can provide this psychedelic experience. And I've spoken with so many people that have been like unbelievably helped by ketamine. And it is, to your point, it's a loophole. The challenge with ketamine, and this is another interesting parallel where it just relates to the regs where like there's loopholes in cannabis that are like that too, right? So like there's something that is called Delta 8. So it's a compound.
Yep.
It's a compound
I can get that in my liquor store.
Yeah, you can get it anywhere. You can get it anywhere. There's a NASCAR team. I'm not kidding you. So like you have all of these businesses that are going through this fairly cumbersome, cost prohibitive process to do things legally and get licensed and do the build out and follow all the regs and stay compliant, and they're not making money because it's difficult and impossible. And like we were talking about with the Schedule 1 stuff, there's financial stuff that comes with it being Schedule 1. And so that is really challenging. So it almost like makes it's harder to do things the right way. But then there's like Delta 8 is a synthetic compound, but it comes from the cannabis plant. It provides a high. It's not unsafe. It's just not regulated. So you don't necessarily know what you're getting, but it's not illegal because it's just not listed. It's not necessarily legal, but it's not illegal. And so, so that's the thing too, is that there's so much, there's a ton of plant botanicals that get you high that no one's even considering.
Oh yeah.
Kratom is one, right?
Like Kratom, kava, like Blue Lotus, like there's all these different things that absolutely get you high.
Yes.
That are just not listed.
They're not listed. So it's like the drug laws are so it's at the discretion of whoever's thinking about it. And if they don't know about it, then it's not there. And so the funny thing with Delta 8 is that you've got all these CBD companies, mostly, that then open up into Delta 8 because then you can provide products that get you high.
Same goddamn plant.
Yeah, it's the same plant. The thing was, I was watching, so my husband works in sports, so I'm kind of a sports nerd too. And we were watching, I'm not a NASCAR person, but the company that he works with watches NASCAR, or owns a NASCAR team. Not that there's anything wrong with NASCAR, but I just want to,
I like how you felt the need to like put that in, like, just clarify real quick. I'm not a NASCAR fan, but
well, because like I was watching the Daytona 500, and like then I was like, interesting. How's that going to brand me? I don't know. But I was watching the Daytona 500, and I noticed that there was a car, and it was fully branded with a cannabis, like there was a cannabis leaf on it. I'm like, what is this? Like, how's
that allowed?
Yeah. And I was like, well, also it was, how's that allowed? But actually more in my mind, I'm like, who has the money in cannabis right now to be sponsoring a NASCAR? Because another similarity between cannabis and psychedelics is a very sort of like winding route to answer your question. But
That's the whole point of the podcast. I love it.
Yeah. The other parallel between the two spaces is that everyone's kind of broke. Like, it is very difficult to make money. Like, it's just true. And it's and I make a joke about it, but it sucks and it's sad, and people are putting like their life savings into this business and not seeing the returns. But there is so much hope that it will come. But that's on both sides with psychedelics. Going back to your point earlier about the ketamine clinics, there's this assumption that like these big sort of like quote unquote blue chip type businesses that were stacking up at the beginning of the psychedelic movement, that were really out there like a field trip. Like, you just assume they're rolling in dough. You just assume it. And the thing is that I work in the financing side of things. I stay close to the VCs. I'm in the capital markets, for better or worse. And the truth is that after the last few years, it's like, there's not institutional capital coming into these spaces. And because of that, these companies are not able to expand in the way that companies in other industries are able to expand. And so that is absolutely another similarity between the two. But that again ties back to the sort of the Schedule 1 side of things. And with psychedelics in that vein, like another difference is that psychedelics there's a lot of different verticals within psychedelics, but really, if we're being pragmatic and realistic about how this is going to roll out, it is going to take a much more scientific drug development pharmaceutical route. And that, when you're talking about drug trials, you're not talking about like $1 to $2 or even $5 to $10 million that these businesses in cannabis are raising to stack up a dispensary or a cultivation. You're talking about 50 to hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's across each individual trial, right? So, and if you look at all of the money that like MAPS, which is in phase 3 with MDMA, that they've raised, I mean, they've been around since the 70s. So like they've been around for much longer, but they've raised hundreds of millions of dollars. I think under 200, but they've, I think over $170 million over the course of the time, right? So it is so expensive to actually do drug development and research. And that is also why this space isn't growing at the pace that we all really want it to, because the money to fund these studies just isn't there yet. And a big piece of that is that I think these big pharmaceutical companies and these bigger pharma type funds that might be interested in it are still not able to truly see what the business model can actually be, right? And I think there's a lot of sort of waiting to see how it rolls out. I think there is a lot of focus on the MAPS trials too.
For sure. Well, what's so interesting to me right now, just kind of watching all this unfold, is the fact that like there are so many companies out there right now that are making like synthetic versions of psilocybin, their own versions of LSD. I saw this one company is trying to make a fucking ayahuasca pill. Like basically like all these companies that are putting all of this money and research and energy into creating their own novel compounds that they can then patent, when we have the real fucking things that grow from the ground that we just haven't properly studied yet. And like it seems like they're just kind of jumping the gun.
Yeah.
Where like if we could just put that money into funding the things that are already there and readily available and like in nature, I feel like it would help the entire thing just go a lot faster. Because out of all these companies that are doing that, realistically, and I'm pretty sure most VCs know this too that are funding them, maybe probably 1 out of 10 of them is actually going to fucking make it at the end of the day, and that's going to be their moonshot. So that's why they have to invest in all of them, because one of them's going to hit.
Yeah, totally. And so I think about this a lot within the psychedelic space, which is that like we're so early. We're so early in this journey. It's like we're early, but we're late. You know, it's like this weird thing where we're like we're like thousands of years late. We're also so early, and it's just this weird position to be in. But there's so, and I understand it because psychedelics, it's deeply tied to indigenous communities and it's sacramental, and you're dealing with neuroscience and people's brains and trauma, and so it's the depth and the passion within psychedelics is slightly more intense, I think, than cannabis.
Well, it's so crazy because like obviously there's a ton of like neuroscience and brain development, all of that shit. Yet all of these indigenous communities that have been using it for thousands of years didn't give one flying fuck about any of that, and they were still using it. And
yes,
like they didn't have any problems.
Yeah, but you know what though? And I completely agree with you where it's like I understand why we need to apply science to it. I understand, and I love the science, and I think it's important.
I do too. I think it's so interesting the way that it works. Like I love geeking out about it.
But to your point, and this is the thing with these various communities like all over the world that have been using psychedelics, ayahuasca, mushrooms, peyote for like centuries and thousands of years beyond. And the thing is, though, is that they are like set and setting, all of these things that we talk about in psychedelics around integration, around qualifying, set and setting. It is so sacramental, right? And you always have somebody there that is so versed in the plant and it has like such deep wisdom. And
it's that those things are embedded in their community just as a whole. Like they don't have to think about it because that's just how they already are.
Precisely. And so I get very excited about the sacramental side of the psychedelic space. I've worked with some churches. I'm working with one now that's out in San Diego that's actually run by Navy SEALs, a loophole with the Religious Freedom Act, which allows churches to use psychedelics as a sacrament in a legal way. America loves religion. And
fuck yeah, we do.
So what I've been, and when I think about psychedelics, like the clinical model and the science side of things and figuring out the pharmaceutical path is necessary because, and I say this all the time, my mom, my grandfather, like these aren't people that are going to necessarily go down to South America or want to do a big retreat or anything like that, right? So that you do need to, we have this mental health crisis and we need to provide access to better healing modalities. And so coming up with ways in which we can deliver the benefits at a neurological level without maybe having a 12-hour, 16-hour LSD trip, that I support, right? That being said, I do genuinely think that the sacramental sort of church model for psychedelics is a really, really solid one because it's not profit-based, which psychedelics is making it. I kind of love, like, in this way, I'm like, the psychedelic movement, like psychedelics, even like mushrooms, they're like, try to figure out how to make money off of us. You can't. Like, so I kind of like in this weird way, and I have this experience with mushrooms where they feel sort of like mischievous sometimes. Like
It's
so
because it's just like baseline truth, like without giving a fuck about any of the rules
yeah.
that you've put in place to like hold it in. It's like, I just don't care. I'm sorry.
Yes. So like I was out in Oregon in the fall at the Horizons conference, and I was meeting with, because I wanted to go out there. I wanted to like see how things were going to be stacked up for licensing. So I was meeting with facilitators that were going for licenses. It was a really fantastic conference. But I left and again, I am here for very soulful purposes and personal reasons. But my background is fundraising, and I am a capitalist to some extent, right? So I really do. I'm like a
You
spiritual
pig.
capitalist. I'm in both worlds. So part of why I was out there was to identify the business opportunity and like, are there investable opportunities in this market that is going to be stood up in Oregon? And I left it thinking, wow, I don't know that this is like a VC. And I knew it's not, right? It's not a VC investment because growing mushrooms is cheap. Anyone can grow mushrooms. You can grow psilocybin mushrooms for the rest of your life for like $50. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
and supply all your friends and family. So that's not like, whereas cannabis, cultivating good cannabis, that's totally different. That is hard as hell. I have tried to grow cannabis multiple times. It is so difficult. Mushrooms, it's not. So that's the other thing too, is like you're dealing with totally different, like in terms of like the skill set that you need. But then beyond that, in Oregon, you're in a container, right? So you have to go to a licensed facility to purchase and then also take the mushrooms on site at that facility with a facilitator. If you're having a journey, you're doing it at that facility for 4+ hours. So when you actually think about scalability, which everyone like, depending on the room that you're in, scalability, when you talk about psychedelics, people are like, get out of my face, you capitalist. But the reality is that we do live in a capitalist world, and these medicines will benefit millions of people. They really will, and figuring out how do we provide access. But then when you think about it, who's making money in the market in Oregon? It's going to be the facilitators, because they're the ones that are committing so much time, right? So they're getting paid for that time. They're going to be the ones that are making the money, but that's much more of a organic business transaction. That's not a, how do we scale this and bring in millions of people into our facilities? Yeah. It's much more of an organic business model. And so I left there being like, you know what? Cool, mushrooms. I kind of like appreciate that you're making this shit hard for us. Like, you know, where it's like, try to figure out how to get your like insane hyper capitalist models that are applied to everything and are fucking up so much shit in our society. And psychedelics is making it hard. So in this way, it's hard to watch because so many of these companies are going to not survive because there isn't funding coming in the way that we want it to be. However, in this sort of like I said, I'm a contrarian in this way. I'm like, all right, cool. Like, they're making it hard for us. Good. It should be. It should be hard.
My hope for what psychedelics are doing, because like, obviously there's the psychedelics, let's call it community. Then there's the healthcare industry. There's, you know, pharma, you know, big pharma and all of that. But like, I think psychedelics, what it seems like from a lot of the people I talk about, are causing people to not just reevaluate how are we going to make money on psychedelics, but like, why is this whole healthcare industry as insanely fucked up as it is? Like, that's what it's making me think, you know, basically just trying to get access to this one thing in mental health. Where I'm like, wait a second, why am I jumping through all these different hoops for all of these other things too?
Yes. So healthcare reform, like the drug policy side of things, and healthcare reform is like near.
They need to go hand in hand. Like, they need to go hand in hand. They genuinely do.
Exactly. And so that is like, it feels like everything that I want to focus on for the rest of my life is about that, is figuring out how to really just push for change in those ways. And like, the reason, for my personal reason on the healthcare side, is that I got addicted to painkillers after I had open heart surgery in 2006. I was given opiates to manage the pain after. That's a super normal thing to do. But the reality was, back then, they were not really limiting how much you could re-up. Where like everything, the opiate stuff was already happening, but it wasn't the drama that it is now, and the sort of overall assumptions that we now have, we're not there yet. And so I had access to a lot of painkillers, and by the end of that summer, I was like I was in it, and it happened without it happened without me even trying, is the thing,
Mhm.
right? And like
Like it
I
was
was
just so easy. Like it was truly that easy.
I was addicted before I knew I was addicted. Like I was dependent before I knew I was dependent. And so and I was already, to be fair though, I was already partying a lot. Like my doors were open to new drug friends. Like I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, you. Okay. All right. So come on in. All right, we're going to hang out
Step
now."
right up.
Yeah, come on. And so that was after my freshman year in high school, college, sorry. And so the rest of my college, my drinking escalated. I ended up getting arrested the following year, actually. So like it ramped up all of the alcohol, right? It ramped
Yeah.
all of that up. And so for me, the healthcare system in general, and like as a woman too, it's pretty dismal when it comes to like literally a healthcare period for women. It's bad for everyone, but like there's just, you can tell that a lot of the medicines that have been created for women, or these like devices for women, have been created by men.
Well, it's based on the male body just changed for a woman.
Yeah, yes, and there's just not, and it's the thing that's cool about the psychedelics movement is there are really cool businesses that are focusing on women's health and sexual health and all of that, and I'm really encouraged by that. But so I think I've just been so disenfranchised from the health. I've had such we all have, right? Like where you're dealing with something, you're sort of being thrown through the ringer, whether you've gotten addicted through like prescribed medications, whether you've gone through the cycle of going through like 8 different SSRIs, none of them working, like, and every time you take a new SSRI, it actually makes it's potentially less effective. So it's just, there's all of these things that are just not that sensible, and they could be. And so your point about how psychedelics is sort of shaking the tree a little bit and saying like, guys, like we're here, we're awesome, you need to figure out how to like let us hang out though, because this shit's not going to work for us. And so it's challenging the model. And that's why with MAPS, with the MDMA assisted therapy, like that model where it's like it's not just about MDMA, it's about MDMA assisted therapy. That's the thing. And to me, that is cool as hell, because right now the model, and the thing that's so challenging about it though is that we're all trained to have instant gratification, right? So the issue, it's not just the model, it's also us as individuals shifting to do the work. So right now you're anxious, take a benzo, you're not anxious anymore, you feel great. And so, and like that's effective. I know so many people that can't function without some of these medications. I'm not anti benzodiazepines. I'm not anti SSRIs. I'm certainly not anti painkillers. It allows people to function, but my issue is that I definitely think that we need to ensure that we have access to all of these different classes of molecules and drugs and be educated about it. But the issue is with psychedelics is that, as you well know, it's work. Like for it
Yeah.
to be effective, it's work. And so is the general population willing to put in the work? I think about this a lot. I'm curious to get your opinion. So I started to really do deep journeys starting January 1st of 2021. So right after the pandemic is when I started to actually start to do like work psychedelics versus like having fun with them.
Yeah.
And it has made my life is so much more fulfilling. I wouldn't have started my business if it wasn't for that. I found myself, all of these things. The list goes on. What I will say though is it hasn't made it less complicated.
For sure.
Because you know, where like, and I'm still doing work, and it's still doing a journey, and it's opened up these doors and realizing like, oh, I had a lot more blocking my line of
Hmm.
sight than I ever even realized. And I would never go back. I would never put it back in the box, but it's it's time consuming. And that's my main thing when I think about this, is that even with microdosing, if you have trauma, it has the potential to bring up some
Yeah.
issues. And so if you're not willing to do the work, like how do you get society to not just be like, give me a pill, and like,
Well,
you know?
So I like that you brought that up, and specifically going to something that you said earlier about how obviously like benzos, SSRIs, painkillers, like they allow you to still function.
Yes.
I think where the biggest problem is that we're born to think that what the only thing that we're supposed to do in society is we need to function and contribute to it, and like do all these things and like contribute to fucking GDP. Like it's so embedded in our minds that we need to be doing things constantly 24/7. And that is the biggest fucking problem, is thinking that we need to be functioning all the fucking time. So they're
Yes.
giving us these pills so we can function all the time, when in reality, what I said at the beginning of this fucking podcast, when I was sick, the only thing I needed to do was just fucking chill and do absolutely nothing.
Yes. Yes. And like we overcomplicate it, right? Too. And so that's it. And I have psychedelics have helped me get there because I was on the hamster wheel. I was
Mhm.
on it and I was ready to run for the rest of
And
my
you were
life.
killing it too.
Oh, but I wasn't happy though, right?
Yeah.
Like I didn't know I wasn't though.
But that's the thing. Yeah. So, like, my life is not any less complicated than it was before. It's more of just the fact that, like, again, it just brings that awareness to the actual things that were making me unhappy before. The fact
Totally.
that, like, I thought that I needed to be doing these things that I just didn't
Yeah.
need to do.
Yes.
And but like, I mean, I think about that question all the time. I'm like, what if I could go back to the
Yeah.
time where like I was so sure of who I was and what I was doing and all of that, even though it was based off of complete fear from my childhood and trauma and
Yes.
shit. But if
Yes.
I could go back and do that, like I wouldn't, but I think about that. I
I
really
know.
do genuinely
Oh,
think about it.
yeah. Okay. I'm glad I brought it up because it is, it's top. And so, and you clearly are like, because it coming, finding psychedelics in the way, so this is the thing that I think about, in terms of like just broader access, right? Which is that the people that are coming into psychedelics now are seekers, they're explorers, they're just deeply in deep distress and need to, they're like at their last sort of like wits end to try to find healing. So right now doing psychedelics and like having these experiences requires actually quite a bit of your own effort to find them.
Yeah.
Even with ketamine, although to be honest, like ketamine, like they're some of these like clinic, they're advertising on Instagram and stuff, so ketamine's like way more accessible. But in like having like a big ayahuasca journey, like you can't just like go outside and be like in New York City and like there are ayahuasca ceremonies happening in New York City all the
You'll find
time,
them.
but you got to find them.
Yeah.
When this becomes more accessible, right? There is like this massive education that has to happen because if people like there's just pill doctors, as you know, like all they do is like, oh, you're anxious, here's some benzos. Oh, you can't concentrate, oh, here's some Adderall. Like all they do is prescribe medication. People take it,
Hmm.
they feel better, or maybe like not that much better, but they think that it's helping. And so my thing is that when and if psychedelics are like broadly available like that,
Hmm.
then you have people really turning things up in their brains. And like, how does society function if everyone is kind of like reevaluating everything?
Society has to change as a whole. And here's the thing, is that when this happens again, us as human beings, when we're born, from that moment, like our just absolute purest self, like we know what it feels like to just embody love and do what we love and just like explore the world and be curious. And then we're told as we grow up, no, you can't do that, you can't do that, think this way, think this way, think this way. And so again, like it's just helping us remember how to think for ourselves again, which is a long process. But once we're all there, once we are all thinking for themselves, like this is where then it gets kind of like spiritual, where there's no real answer, but like it's just like that surrender and trust to the universe that like everything's going to figure itself out. But like we got to go through this period of just absolute fucking chaos first, and
Okay.
just trust that while we're going through the period of absolute fucking chaos, that it will work out in the end. But we just
Okay.
kind of got to get through it.
Yeah. Okay. So that's because that's exactly what I was getting at, right? Like like chaos. Like it's, but it's like there. I'm so
The
glad that
world already, well, here's the thing, the world already is chaos. We just have all these systems in place to convince ourselves that it's not.
that's a great point. Yes, I love that, and that's it right there because it's true. Every time you interact with any government body, you're like, how? What?
Who
like
decided this? Who made a
what? How
decision
is
to do
this?
this?
Oh my gosh! So it's a great point. Like it's all chaos, and it's and then you've got bureaucracy
Yeah.
that fakes
And like
fake
we
organization.
also tried our best to, like, I want to make that very clear. I'm not blaming the government and anyone for our problems. Like people were really trying. I have to believe that somebody was trying their best out there. They missed the mark completely, but they were trying their best.
I appreciate that. Yes, no, definitely assume positive intent. Right? Assume positive intent, poor execution.
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
yeah. So, but it's just it is something that I think about, and so but I also agree with you that, like you said, like I said, like I would never go back. I
No.
couldn't go back. And even like 3, 4 years ago, it wasn't that long ago. I'm like, whoa, I can't believe how much I wasn't clocking and how much I only thought that there was one lane to exist in. And then coming out of that lane, it's opened up my world. But I am still figuring my shit out, man. Like I'm still working through exactly where to go. But to your point, I do think that releasing more of this, it's going to be chaotic.
Yeah.
My fear is that there will be an overreaction to the chaos like
Yeah.
there was last time, and then people freak out and it gets shut down. That is honestly, and that is why I do believe there needs to be acute intentional focus on ensuring that the way that we're messaging this publicly, the
Yeah.
way that we are rolling things out to the public as we start to distribute at a mass level, like we have to be super intentional in
I
everything that we do.
I didn't wear this shirt on purpose today, but exactly what it says, which is take it slow. Like
Yes.
we need to intentionally go slow. We cannot
Yes.
rush to try to make a bunch of money, which is what people are trying to do. And I get it. But like it does need to be slowly over time. Like we need to stop. Obviously, we want to accomplish these great things in our lifetimes, but like I hate to say it, but our possible 100-year existence on this earth that's 7 billion years old doesn't really make the biggest difference at the end. So like
Exactly.
think generationally to set the actual future selves like we're never going to meet. That's how we need to be thinking about this. And that's why Maps has done such a great job is they started in the 70s and they're still here. It's been 50 years and
Incredible.
they're still working on it. Like it's still not legal. And
The resilience of Rick Doblin and that team is truly astonishing.
yeah.
It is incredible, and I couldn't agree with you more, Cam. The way I think about it is that we're all just a string of DNA, right? Like we are all, and like you, me, and like what happens is the baton was passed to us right now, and like I've got the baton, you've got the baton. Every single person alive right now has the baton for our species in this long ass relay race, and our responsibility is to just try to move things forward. I do believe that, and it's like to your point, I don't know, I don't if I would love to see this stuff all available in my lifetime. It may not happen in
Mhm.
the way that I am envisioning it, but if we can move it forward for our species,
Just a
like
tiny inch.
yeah, just even a little bit of a smidge, just move it forward. And if we can impact individuals one to one as we're going, fantastic. And so I don't have children, but I don't know. I think psychedelics also makes you realize how small you are and how we're just part of this big species and this organism that is the planet Earth. And I think about how we're this like flickering tiny little light in this vast expanse darkness, and like we're it's our responsibility to try to just keep fueling that
Mhm.
fire, not literally light our planet on fire, which we're doing right now, but like just keep it alive and keep it like abundant and positive. And so,
And also just at the same time like just doing our best, like following your intuition and what you think is the actual best next step to do that without
completely.
thinking that like you need to have all of the answers. Because like again, part of the productive society is like, well, why are you
Yes.
doing this? What's that going to lead to? Like no, just just right now, whatever I think is the next step, just
Oh
do
my
that
God.
one thing and just fucking reevaluate from there.
Yes. So I love that you said that. So I do so since the pandemic, January 1st, I go solo, do a deep heroic mushroom trip, right?
Like
So
the
that's
5 gram blindfold on.
yeah, 4 gram is my cap. I haven't gotten up
Okay.
to 5. 4 gram takes me to the moon. So
It's a lot.
I haven't gone full 5 yet. But 4 is the most. But yeah, so it's like, and exactly. And so I don't do New Year's resolutions on my own. I actually turn to the mushrooms for help
I love
because
that.
I don't trust I'm like, because I'm like, oh, you need to have X amount of money in your bank account.
When you haven't been taught how to, again, when you're a kid, you're not taught to listen to your intuition. You're taught to like believe these things.
Right. It's so, yeah, exactly. So it's so, my resolutions are always so lame. And so I always go to the mushrooms, and then like in the integration post, you kind of come together with like, what is my actual focus for this year? And this year, it was very clear. Like, you know how sometimes you're having a trip and it's just like this voice, it's like, idiot, like it should be like this. And you're like, damn.
Shit, I knew that.
Why do I need these mushrooms? It's in my brain. So it was the takeaway is like, don't create any New Year's resolutions, like no resolutions. The only resolution you should have is that in the microsecond, every second, just hyper focus on what if you asked your deathbed self what you would do in this moment, just do that. And that has been what I've been focusing on. The only thing I focus on is literally at the micro moment, and what it has done, and what that actually is stay aggressively present. We overcomplicate so much because we're in this cycle of just trying to do all the time. And if you because the only thing that exists is literally the second right now. That's the only thing that exists. Everything else is just in our minds, in your mind, and they're not exactly aligned. Your experience is so different. All we can agree on is right now, is we're in it with each other. And so shifting, and that's it. I think that's the point of everything.
Is. I agree. I completely agree. And on that is so beautiful. We're going to end it here.
Perfect.
Thank you all for listening so much. Really, really appreciate all of the continued support. If you have any ideas for guests that you would like to see on the podcast, or if you yourself would even like to be on the podcast, please send me an email at tripsittingblog@gmail.com, or also feel free to just shoot me a DM on Instagram. I always love interacting with anybody who's listening, or if you just have any questions or anything like that, always happy to have a chat. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.